Here is my recap on Dexter Season 6, Episode 3, entitled Smokey and the Bandit. Now, this episode gets its title because there's a scene in the show, in this particular episode, where we've got Batista and the whole team examining a body that was found, this strangled prostitute who had a tooth actually pulled from her mouth. And off to the side, there was a Trans Am from the 80s sitting over there, and we've got Batista, who was basically drooling over that vehicle and kind of makes a comment that that was the car he really wanted when he was in high school. And by the end of the episode, he actually owns that vehicle. It was for sale and he ends up buying it. Now, we don't see him buy it, but we see him driving in it in one of the final shots of the episode. So that's where it kind of gets its name from. Now, this episode's very interesting because we find just about every character in some kind of a dire straits in this particular episode. So we've got little storylines here. We've got Masuka and his new assistant. He gets very close to her in this episode, and they actually go out on a date. We had Quinn, who tried to hit on her. She kind of rejected him. We also find out that she is obsessed with the ice truck killer, going all the way back to the very first season of Dexter. Masuka ends up getting all of the stuff from that case out of evidence and brings it down so she can examine it. And she falls in love with it. And by the end of the episode, she's actually taking the hand that had the finger, the arm that had the different colored fingernails on it from season 1. She takes that and puts it in her purse right as she's about to go on a date with Masuka. So we're going to find out what happens with her and the evidence and stuff in upcoming episodes. We have Quinn, who just broke up with Deborah. Deborah now has the lieutenant. Her title is now lieutenant. She's new there at the police department in that position. And that brings with it some challenges. He feels like she just threw him aside because of that. There's a lot of animosity there. And the last shot is him basically having sex with a woman in the most non-connected way possible. And it kind of goes along with the dire straits that I talked about. The very final shot is just a bunch of the different characters dealing with their own little issues. Deborah's dealing with being lieutenant, and nobody believes she has to hire somebody to fill a position there. We've got LaGuerta, who gives her some advice on who she should pick, but Deborah wants to go with her intuition based on everybody she looked at. And LaGuerta said, well, if this goes wrong, I'm not going to back you up. And so Deborah ends up bringing in the guy that she wanted, and this guy doesn't believe she's a lieutenant. They get off on the wrong foot, and she realizes this isn't all it's cut out to be. She's wondering if she should even be in that position. There's even a scene in this episode where Dexter asks her for a raise. She thinks he's kidding. He says he's not, and she kind of leaves the room, disgusted that he even asked. So she has some challenges there being the new lieutenant. Let's talk about the big story. Well, before I get to the big storyline, we also have these other killers. We have Edwards, James Olmos, and we have Colin Hanks. And they're only in this for a handful of episodes or a handful of scenes in every episode. And it's getting kind of weird. So in the very last episode, one of the things I forgot to mention was that Colin Hanks ends up hitting this guy over the head while he's jogging. And at the beginning of this episode, that guy is tied up, which looks like to be in a church on the concrete floor. And he's got things around his wrists and he's bolted to the floor. And Colin is terrorizing this guy, telling him, you got to repent. You got to truly repent. If you truly repent, you'll get out of this okay. But if you don't, it's going to get much, much worse for you. Well, the guy ends up actually being able to break free from the concrete later in the episode and tries to make a run for it. And as he's leaving, there's this big horse out there that startles him. And then the very last shot of this episode is this horse going down the street in Miami you've got body parts from the guy, his head sewn on to like a mannequin, and there's mannequin parts. So it's kind of everything's mixed matched on these horses that are riding down this Miami street. So we're going to find out what's going on with them here in the future. Now, let's go back to Dexter's whole storyline today. This is very interesting because Dexter was talking with Sam from the last episode, that convict who had killed somebody and is now reformed. And he tells him, Sam calls up Dexter and says, your car's ready. You can come pick it up. And he invites him to kind of like a church gathering or a gathering of those people there. And Dexter tells him, I'm not religious at all. And so he He ends up not going to that, but he does end up picking up his car. So Sam was in this for just a little bit, for a few seconds, not very much screen time at all. But the big storyline was that woman who was found with her tooth pulled. She was a working girl, so she was a prostitute. And Dexter then goes back to remembering, he has a scrapbook of different serial killers that he kept from his childhood. And his dad, his dark passenger, was there telling him, I would have liked it if I found Playboys, not something like this when you were a child. But that's what Dexter carried. And there was one case that he was obsessed with as a kid that never got solved. And this has to do with a guy. He was called the Tooth Fairy. He would pull a tooth from each of his victims. So every one of his victims had a tooth missing. And Dexter says, has he shown up here in Miami? And his dad tells him, well, that can't be possible because that guy would be like 70 years old now. So Dexter starts going to these different retirement communities and tells them that he's looking for a place for his dad to go, which is obviously a lie, but he wants to get in, and he wants to look and see if there's a connection, because this guy was like from Connecticut or something where these other murders happened. So he wanted to find out if there were any people in that facility that would match someone that age who could have done this in this other state. And so he does. He ends up getting the attention of the attendant there, saying, my dad is from Connecticut. I'd like to match him up with people who are from Connecticut. Would you be able to do that? So the woman gives him 3 names of people that came from Connecticut there at that facility. Well, it doesn't actually give him the names. That would go against some laws, but she ends up telling him, yes, there are 3 people here that he would have something in common with. He distracts her, so she goes to get some coffee for him and then grabs those names off the computer and does some research and found out 2 of them couldn't have been that person, but the third one possibly could be. That's what the majority of this episode is Dexter getting close to this guy that he think could be the Tooth Fairy. He holds this guy in high regard, by the way. So it's very interesting on how this unfolds. He plays golf with him. He ends up getting not drugs, but medicine for him. And later on, the guy realizes that Dexter is onto him. Dexter finds out he is the Tooth Fairy. He ends up breaking into this storage unit that he has, and he has trophies in there. He has the teeth of all of his victims in a thing, kind of like Dexter has his blood slides. And this kind of troubles Dexter when he finds this. He's like, oh my gosh, is this my future? He starts thinking about, in the future, am I destined to be alone? And is this how I'm going to end up as an old man? And it kind of freaks him out a little bit. The guy calls him on the phone. Dexter doesn't realize that he knows, but the guy calls him and says, I'm lost. I need you to come pick me up. And Dexter's like, oh, he's going to make it easy for me to kill him. I'm going to go pick him up and I'm going to get rid of him. Well, the guy's a little smarter than that. Ends up taking Dexter hostage, puts a gun to his head and says, I may be old, but I'm not stupid. How did you find me? He actually had done some research on Dexter the day that he went to go get him his medicine. He actually got some information from Dexter's glove compartment and did some research and found out Dexter does work for the police department. So he's wondering how they found him. Dexter doesn't say anything about the police department, but ends up getting the upper hand by crashing his vehicle and causing the airbags to go off. The next scene is the guy on the table. Dexter doesn't end up stabbing him, finds out that the guy is a sad old man, so he's going to leave that facility. Actually, people will think he had a heart attack. So Dexter smothers him to death, cleans up the body, leaves it for the facility to find. He then goes home to be with his son. And this is kind of where we start seeing these little scenes of everybody having their own little issues that they're dealing with. And Dexter ends up pulling out his slide case to put the new blood slide in and drops them all. A couple of them shatter. Dexter's a little devastated. He doesn't know what order they go in and who they belong to. That's the last shot, is him kind of laying there on the floor with all of his slides just kind of spread out everywhere. And he seems like he's about to have a nervous breakdown. So kind of an interesting episode. We see Dexter definitely thinking more about his future rather than just the present and what that could lead to. Kind of a strange season so far. This was the most interesting episode so far out of the 3 episodes in season 6. They're not doing they're not moving that storyline along too much with Colin Hanks and Edward James Olmos. So we're going to see where this leads in the future. We've got what's going to happen with Masuka and his assistant, the blonde-haired girl. Lots of different things going on in this season, so we're going to see where this leads. If you guys like these videos, hit the like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell. You will be notified as I have new videos go up. I will be reviewing every episode until the new season starts. I plan on getting these out pretty quickly so people have time to watch these long before season 9 actually starts. See you guys on the next video.